Man, it's good to be back, guys. It's good to be back. What's up, tech fam? Welcome back to Boss Coders, where it's more than just code. Last week we embarked on the first half of our app venture, while today we're going to dive in a little bit deeper. So buckle up for steps 6 to 10 and let's architect this thing. Jeez, scene collection and that. Sorry. So, first step, right? We're going to dive right into this. Step 6. Architecture design. So, I know you think we're about to get into coding. Not today. Well, not right now at least. Imagine trying to build a house without a blueprint. Sounds a bit risky, right? Similarly, when you create an app, you need a solid plan in place. You need a sturdy foundation to withstand storms, robust architecture to thrive in this digital realm, and especially nowadays, right, the digital landscape is more challenging than ever. So gone are the days of these simple apps where you're catering to a couple users or here and there. No, apps are harnessing the power of big data, AI, and the systems are vast, the data is intricate, and it's demanding top-notch performance consistently. Instead of catering to a handful of users, your API might be getting pummeled by millions. You know, it's crazy right now. So let's delve a little deeper into what actually architecting the design would look like. So there's some concerns that you have to go through, and the devil is in the details. So these are things like, how will you store the data? Or what caching mechanisms will you employ? Will you need message queues? Or are you building a real-time app? Will you need technologies like WebSockets for the real-time communication? Or will you need Redis for the speedy caching? These decisions need careful thought and design, and I personally would say there's no other way to I'd personally say there's no other way to learn about this other than looking at how other great designs have been done, right? So most of the big companies, they'll produce design documents and you can go and see how they've tackled certain problems or what their architecture looks like. So yeah, that'll be the first step. A big one to think about is microservices versus monolithic. Will your app be a cohesive unit or a network of similar interconnected little services, right? So for simpler apps, often like what you do if you're a freelance person like myself, monolithic architecture might suffice, but it's often, and believe me, I'm speaking from experience, it's very painful usually to transfer from a monolith to microservices. Even more so if you're doing it in a team and there's some people who aren't as well versed in the distributed systems. On the other hand, if you're building a large application right off the bat with various functionalities from user management to payment processing, a microservices approach might actually be more suitable. And this is especially true again if you're in a team that's familiar with microservices. And I'll link some documentation below on maybe how you could choose between these two steps. And right, a wise person once said, the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. But let me tell you this, right? You don't want to grapple with a poorly designed architecture. You need to invest the time, do it up front, and it'll pay dividends in the long run. And as I said, the best way is to learn from others, learn how quality applications have been done. A good book that I used to use, started off using it when I was interviewing, System Design Interview, Insider's Guide, Volume 1 and 2. Now that breaks down some serious design architectures. I'll link this in the description as well. Also, doing the solutions architect exam with Amazon. With AWS. I know other cloud providers have a similar sort of thing. That solutions architect area is very closely linked to system design. So yeah, I would recommend that as well. So boom. Next thing now. Application development. We're finally there. We're finally there, guys. After only 7 steps. But you see, this is what good design is, right? You don't dive straight in. And to be honest, this should be the easiest part. So this is where we're turning your blueprints into reality. And as I said, if you have well thought out blueprints, this should be easy. So we're going to do this. I'm going to breeze through this parts because most of these parts are easy now, right, guys? So we've got iterative development. I'm a fan of Agile. I'm sure you all know. If you didn't, now you do. So employing methodologies like cyclical development. You want to get stuff out fast. You want to get it client feedback fast. You want to keep communication lines open, all of that good stuff. Incorporate feedback into each product increment, and you want to develop, test, rinse, repeat, refine, repeat. You're constantly evolving, guys, constantly evolving. Oh, and one thing, if I cannot stress this enough, my manager has taught me the crux of application development. I might be overstating it, but keep things local, guys. So often when you're working in big companies, you'll have CI and CD pipelines that will take like 20 minutes just for you to get a simple one-line change, right? So as much as you can, keep everything local, keep it fast, get those unit tests there, and spoke about the next part. But yeah, you want to make it so you're getting instant feedback. So the difference between having things set up locally, which might take longer, right? You might have to download, say if you're using AWS, there's something called local stack. You might have to download that, set it up. That's a whole thing in itself. But once you've got that set up, I'm telling you, your development speed will vastly increase compared to having to use these CI/CD pipelines. You usually have to use with Jenkins, all that nonsense, man. We don't mess with that. We're all local over here, right? And then when you know it works, boom, straight up, pull, push, Bob's your uncle. So next step, which really should have been the step before, if you're a TDD guy, we're doing the testing, right? So what is an app's worst enemy? If you can tell me that, £100 right now. Send me your account details. Too slow. So app's worst enemy is actually bugs, right? So this, I've got it as step 8, but really it should be in the same boat as step 7 or even before. You want to be thinking about, hopefully you guys can't hear that airplane, but if you can, I'm sorry. You want to be thinking about first of all, user acceptance tests. You want to figure out what those are before you even get started, because that's basically how your whole application is going to be evaluated, right? But on top of that, often great developers will use some sort of test-driven or behavioral-driven development where they're writing sort of tests, small tests, mind you, because we want to move quick. So there'll be unit tests usually that can evaluate code pieces. And usually in these kind of development strategies, you'll have this thing called, I think it's like red, green, something like this, where you write your test, it should fail instantly, and then you write the code that should actually make the test pass, and then you can refactor and you can go back and continue in that cycle, right? So I've mentioned unit tests, but there's more than unit tests. There's integration tests, there's user acceptance tests, there's pummeling your application and hoping it doesn't DDoS it. That's a type of test. I think they're calling it chaos engineering these days, but you know what I mean. There's plentiful amounts of tests. The more testing you do, the more robust. Don't get hung up on code coverage and all those things. It's good, but also that's not the be all and end all, right? The actual goal is to get rid of as many bugs as possible. And on the code coverage thing, I could write one test that hits the main entry point of the app, does a few things, and boom. I've not tested any extreme cases, I've not done anything like that, but unit test coverage is 70%, 80%. So yeah, don't focus too much on that. I'd say get it to a good point, and then after that, it's just making sure that you've covered more so the different types of tests. So we've got usability testing as well. So this is where the app might work fine, but is it user friendly? Gather some real users, observe their interactions, and this is great for fine tuning your application. So it's usually in the later stages, right? So deployment and maintenance. Come on, guys, you've baked the cake, you've baked it up. Now it's time to serve it. Keep it fresh, warm. You know them ones. Apple crumble, potluck at church. Jeez. We're going for hosting environment first. Based on your app's needs, we've got to choose the right hosting environment. And there's a lot of different platforms. We're not going to dive into them. You got traditional hosting, or you got AWS, Azure, GCP. You've got who even knows what's going on these days? But so many different platforms. You've got so many different platforms on top of platforms. might be called SaaS types of things, where it takes away a lot of what you need to do. Things like Netlify, Heroku, what's Amazon's one? Is it Beanstalk? Man, I can't remember. But yeah, you get the drift. You don't need to look too deep into it, because if you've done the rest of the steps correctly, hopefully you're tapped in and you're thinking. You don't want to be vendor locked, right? So you want to make sure, personally, usually you want to make sure you're using containers. You want to make sure you can maneuver through the snake path, as I like to call it. So that's that. And then you also got to make sure that you're regularly monitoring. And I can't stress this part enough. It's even what I'm starting to realize now is that it's when I'm actually in the beginning stages, it's great to set up some sort of monitoring type of reporting. And when I say beginning stages, I don't mean like right when I'm starting to write the code. I mean like not when I've already, not on like the 8th iteration when something's failed and everything's gone wrong. Like right around the first product increment, you want to get these monitoring things in place, because it's going to be so useful. One, your higher ups might ask for the information. They might want to see, is this actually a worthwhile feature that we're building in, or a worthwhile tool? 2, you might need to check for performance issues, security vulnerabilities, any bugs, all that kind of stuff. So building that in as early as possible is amazing. And there's tools these days that can make it even easier, so there's no excuse really. Cool. Last and not least, documentation and training. So this is like leaving breadcrumbs for your future self. Document everything, and I mean everything. Document when you're writing code. Document in the code. Document when you're passing it on to other people. Like, it's so underrated, and I can't stress the pain I feel when I take over for someone who's out, or I'm trying to pick up a project on GitHub and the guy's just not documented a thing. Like, he's got a couple comments here and there, and they're the useless comments as well. They're the comments that I could have just gauged from looking at the code, rather than actually telling me, okay, how can I settle my development? How do I develop on this code base? What are some common issues I might have? Maybe an architecture doc, like all of these kind of things, right? This is for developers in present and in future. And you've also got user manuals, you've got code base documentation. All right, at the very least, you guys are writing comments, right? So you're at least writing markdown, readme files. On top of that though, architecture documentation is amazing, but it can also be a double-edged sword, because you make especially at the beginning, especially when you're moving quick and you're iterating, you create your architecture. Okay, now we've got different requirements, got to change it again. So maybe a lot of tools these days are helping with that and helping you create actual diagrams from the code, so maybe look into that. But however it's done, just get it done, right? So that's basically it, guys. We've gone through 10 different steps. These are the 5 steps from last week. I'm sure you'll remember, and if you've not watched that video, I'll link it below. So requirements gathering, defining the scope, data modeling, application flow and wireframing, choosing the right tech stack. Man, we've gone through a lot, haven't we? Let's just take a minute before we get into these. We've got architecture design, right? We've got application development, testing, deployment and maintenance, and hopefully you guys have been listening, documentation and testing, right? Designing an application, I like to think of it as art. There's no right or wrong answers, apart from when it comes to using a nonsense programming language. You know who I'm talking about. But yeah, there's no right or wrong answers. Attention to detail, thorough testing and continuous refinement. Your application can really stand out in the digital realm. And I'm trying to just offer some guiding light here. I'm not the best there is. I'm pretty low on the totem pole, to be honest. But make sure you're always ready to learn and adapt, because all that matters is your growth, not where you start. And in the tech world, change is the only constant. Yep, so that's a wrap to our 10-step journey from idea to launch and beyond. If you enjoyed this, drop a like, smash the subscribe button. Let me know what's the funniest bug you've encountered, maybe. Until next time, stay coding.